Welcome, dear dreamers. Tonight, let the stars guide you as we follow Princess Sophie on her journey across the sky. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let my voice carry you gently into a realm of light and wonder. As the night unfolds, may you find peace and drift into a restful sleep. Now let us begin. Once upon a time, in a kingdom where the sky danced with the light of 1,000 stars, there lived a princess named Sophie. Born under a rare celestial alignment, her people believed her destiny was written in the stars. Yet, despite the grandeur of her life, Sophie often felt a quiet yearning in her heart, as though the stars themselves whispered secrets only she could not hear. The night of her coronation arrived, bathed in the glow of a full moon that hung low over the kingdom's towers. The entire realm gathered in the grand courtyard to witness their princess crowned as queen. Musicians played soft, lilting tunes, and the air was sweet with the fragrance of night-blooming flowers. Sophie, dressed in a gown that shimmered like the evening sky, took her place on the marble steps of the palace. As the final preparations for the ceremony unfolded, a hush fell over the crowd. From the shadows stepped a figure wrapped in a cloak as dark as the void between the stars. The mysterious visitor moved with such grace that not even the guards dared to challenge their approach. In their gloved hand, they carried a small velvet box, which they held out to the princess. Sophie's heart beat faster as the figure knelt before her. The silence in the courtyard was almost deafening, broken only by the soft rustle of the visitor's cloak as they bowed low. "Your Highness," the figure spoke, their voice like the sigh of the night wind. "I come from a place beyond your sight, where the stars weave the fates of all who dwell beneath them. I bring a gift meant for only those who walk the celestial path." With a sweep of their hand, they opened the velvet box to reveal a feather unlike any Sophie had ever seen. It shimmered with a light that shifted and glowed like the constellations themselves, its soft edges flickering with silver and gold. The feather seemed to pulse with life, and as Sophie reached for it, a warmth spread through her fingertips. "This," the stranger said, "is the celestial feather. It holds the power to reveal paths hidden from mortal eyes. Paths that lead not across your world, but through the stars themselves. Your journey is about to begin, Princess Sophie, though it will demand much of you. You must follow where the feather leads, for the fate of your kingdom, indeed the fate of all realms, may rest upon it." The crowd, which had been frozen in awe, murmured with curiosity and fear. Who was this stranger? What power did they bring? But Sophie, feeling a strange calmness in her heart, accepted the feather with reverence. The moment she touched it, the feather glowed brighter, casting a radiant light around her. The world seemed to blur and bend, and for a brief second, Sophie saw something she could scarcely believe. A path, gleaming like silver dust, stretching into the night sky. It twisted and turned, vanishing among the stars, beckoning her toward an unknown destination. "Remember," the figure whispered, their voice now low and urgent. "The path is not easy, and danger will follow, but trust in the feather, and it will guide you." With that, the stranger turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind no trace except the lingering glow of the feather in Sophie's hand. Sophie stood in silence, her mind racing. She felt the weight of her people's eyes upon her, but something deep within her knew that this was no ordinary coronation gift. This was a calling. The stars had sent her a sign, and she could not ignore it. She looked to the sky, now more vivid and alive than ever before, as if the stars themselves were watching her. Her father, King Aldrich, stepped forward. "My daughter," he said softly, his voice filled with both pride and concern. "It seems your path is no longer bound to this earth alone." Sophie nodded, her gaze never leaving the feather. "I must follow it, Father. Whatever lies ahead, I feel it calling me." And so, with the celestial feather in hand, Princess Sophie's journey began. Not through the familiar roads of her kingdom, but through the boundless realms of the stars. The feather would lead her toward a destiny she had never imagined, one filled with trials, celestial wonders, and the unknown shadows that followed. Little did she know, the stars were not just her guides, they were her destiny. The night after her coronation, Princess Sophie stood on the highest balcony of the palace, gazing up at the infinite sky. The celestial feather, now hers to bear, glowed faintly in her hand, as if it were breathing in rhythm with the stars above. The night was still, the world below her asleep, but Sophie's heart beat with the thrill of the unknown. She held the feather aloft, watching its light flicker and pulse. And then, just as it had the night before, the feather illuminated a path, a trail of starlight stretching from the palace to the farthest reaches of the heavens. The silver dust of the celestial road shimmered, winding its way through the constellations, twisting and turning, disappearing into the night. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. The path was no illusion. It was as real as the ground beneath her feet, yet it beckoned her toward a place far beyond her understanding. "I have to follow it," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the night air. The pull of the feather was undeniable, a magnetic force tugging at her heart. Sophie could feel it, a gentle but insistent urge to leave behind the familiar world of her kingdom and embark on a journey that would take her far beyond its borders. The thought filled her with both wonder and fear. But her resolve was strong. The stars had given her a gift, and she could not ignore their call. So, with a deep breath, Sophie turned away from the balcony and prepared for her journey. She gathered only the essentials: a cloak, sturdy boots, and a small satchel of provisions. The feather would be her guide, and she knew she could trust its light to lead her safely. Before dawn, Sophie slipped out of the palace unnoticed, her steps quiet against the cobblestone streets. She made her way through the silent city, past slumbering houses and darkened shops, until she reached the outskirts of the kingdom. There, where the city's walls met the vast open plains, the starry path awaited her. The moment she stepped onto the glowing trail, the world around her shifted. The sounds of the city faded into nothingness, replaced by the soft hum of the stars. The air grew cooler, crisper, and Sophie felt as if she were walking not on the earth, but on a bridge made of light. Above her, the sky swirled with constellations, brighter and more vibrant than she had ever seen before. With each step, the feather pulsed in her hand, its glow growing stronger as if encouraging her to continue. Sophie followed the path, her heart pounding with anticipation. She did not know where it would lead, only that it was taking her farther from her home and deeper into the unknown. As she walked, the celestial road twisted and turned, leading her through strange and wondrous landscapes. At times, the path seemed to soar into the sky itself, lifting her feet from the ground and carrying her across great distances in the blink of an eye. Other times, it dipped into valleys filled with glowing plants and shimmering streams, their waters reflecting the constellations above. Hours passed, though time itself seemed to lose its meaning on this enchanted path. The stars above moved slowly, like guardians watching over her journey, their light a constant companion. Sophie marveled at the beauty of the heavens, feeling as though she had stepped into a world beyond her own, a realm where the boundaries between the earth and sky no longer existed. But as the day turned into night and the moon rose high in the sky, Sophie began to feel the weight of her journey. Her legs grew tired, her steps slower, but still the feather glowed brightly, urging her onward. It wasn't until she reached a clearing, an expanse of glowing grass under a sky filled with swirling galaxies, that Sophie finally paused. The path ahead seemed to vanish into the stars, disappearing into a horizon she could not see. Exhausted, she sat down on the soft grass, the feather's light dimming slightly in her hand. For the first time since leaving her kingdom, doubt crept into her heart. The path had led her far from home, farther than she could have imagined. The stars still whispered their secrets, but their voices seemed distant now, as if they were testing her resolve. "Where am I going?" she murmured, gazing up at the sky. "And what lies ahead?" The feather flickered in response, its light pulsing gently. Sophie took a deep breath, her determination returning. She did not have all the answers, but the path was clear. The stars had chosen her for this journey, and she would not turn back now. With renewed strength, Sophie rose to her feet, her eyes fixed on the celestial road before her. The journey had only just begun, and whatever lay at the end of the starry path, she knew she must follow it. And so, beneath the watchful gaze of the heavens, Princess Sophie continued her journey through the stars, guided by the light of the celestial feather. Sophie walked for what seemed like days, though time had begun to blur on the starry path. The feather's soft glow was her only guide, its light flickering with every step as if urging her forward. She had crossed valleys filled with stardust, wandered through forests where the leaves glimmered like polished silver, and even past rivers that sparkled with fragments of the cosmos. Yet, despite the beauty around her, she knew she was approaching something far greater, a threshold beyond the stars themselves. The air around her began to shift, growing denser and cooler. As Sophie continued along the celestial trail, a massive structure appeared on the horizon. It shimmered into view, like a mirage formed from starlight. Her heart quickened at the sight, for this was no ordinary gate. This was the Constellation Gate, a legendary entrance said to separate the mortal world from the celestial realms. The gate stood tall, towering above her, formed entirely of interlocking constellations. Each star within it pulsed with a gentle glow, and the shapes of ancient celestial creatures, lions, dragons, and winged serpents, seemed to writhe and shift, as though alive within the gate's frame. Sophie could feel the power radiating from it, a hum in the air that vibrated through her bones. As she approached, the ground beneath her feet began to glow, forming a circle of light around the gate. It seemed to respond to her presence, its stars burning brighter, as though acknowledging her arrival. But even as the gate shimmered with brilliance, Sophie sensed an unspoken challenge. The path had led her here, but she knew instinctively that crossing the gate would not be as simple as stepping through. A voice echoed softly from the heavens, distant yet powerful. Who seeks to pass through the Constellation Gate? Sophie stepped forward, her voice steady but respectful. I am Princess Sophie, guided by the celestial feather. I seek the path that lies beyond, to follow where the stars lead. The air around her stilled, and from the starlit sky above, a great figure descended, a celestial guardian. This being, woven from the very fabric of the constellations, stood before her in a form that shifted and shimmered with each movement. It had the body of a man, but wore a crown of stars, and wings made of light unfurled from its back. In one hand, it held a staff that sparkled with cosmic dust. I am Orion, guardian of the stars, the figure intoned, its voice deep and resonant, echoing like the whisper of the cosmos. Only those who can unlock the wisdom of the stars may pass through this gate. You hold the celestial feather, but that alone is not enough. You must solve the riddle of the constellations and prove your worth. Sophie felt a weight settle on her chest, but she nodded. What must I do? Orion waved his staff, and the stars within the gate began to shift, rearranging themselves into unfamiliar patterns. Constellations she had never seen before glittered before her, their shapes twisting into cryptic symbols. Above them, the feather in her hand flickered, as if sensing the task ahead. The stars, Orion began, tell stories older than the Earth itself. These constellations hold forgotten tales, each one a key to the knowledge you seek. To pass, you must name the stars and their stories. Sophie's gaze swept over the glowing constellations. She had been taught the stories of the stars as a child, but these shapes were strange, foreign to her eyes. The feather's glow pulsed in her hand, guiding her. Slowly, she focused on one constellation, a set of stars that formed the shape of a serpent coiled around a tree. The memory stirred within her. This, Sophie began, is serpens, the celestial serpent that guarded the tree of life in ancient times. It represents eternal knowledge, hidden from mortal eyes. Orion nodded, his expression unreadable. But the constellation blazed brighter, signaling her success. Encouraged, Sophie turned to the next, a cluster of stars that formed the outline of a great lion, its mane flowing like the rays of the sun. And this is Leo, the lion who roared the first dawn into existence. His strength is a symbol of creation. Again, the constellation flared with light. One by one, Sophie named the stars, each a story long forgotten by the world below. With each constellation she named, the gate began to glow brighter, until finally there was but one left. It was a small constellation, nearly hidden in the shadows of the larger ones, a simple pattern of 3 stars forming a single delicate feather. She gasped. The feather of stars, the very one I hold. Orion's expression softened. You have done well, Princess. You have unlocked the knowledge of the stars, and thus the gate shall open for you. With a sweep of his staff, the great constellation gate began to part, the stars within it swirling like a vortex, revealing a new path beyond, a path that led into the heart of the celestial realms. Sophie stood at the threshold, her heart pounding. The stars had tested her, and she had prevailed. But as she stepped through the gate, she knew that the true journey was only just beginning. Beyond the constellation gate, Sophie entered a realm that seemed to defy all laws of nature. The sky above was not the dark expanse she had known, but a luminous sea of swirling stars and celestial bodies. Nebulas glowed in vibrant hues of violet and blue, and galaxies spun lazily in the distance, as if they were great wheels turning the fabric of the universe. Time and space seemed to fold and bend, yet there was a stillness in the air, as if this place existed outside of mortal understanding. As Sophie walked, the celestial feather continued to glow in her hand, its light guiding her along a path that shimmered with stardust. She felt a sense of weightlessness, as though the very air was alive with cosmic energy, lifting her with each step. The further she ventured into this strange, beautiful world, the more she felt the presence of something ancient watching over her. It wasn't long before she noticed a figure standing ahead, its form silhouetted against the bright stars. The figure was tall and imposing, draped in a cloak that seemed to be woven from the night sky itself. Its eyes, glowing like twin stars, watched her approach with an intensity that made her heart race. As she drew closer, the figure stepped forward, revealing himself fully. He was no mere man, but a celestial being, his skin glowing faintly with the light of distant galaxies. His eyes, so bright and piercing, held a wisdom far beyond anything Sophie had ever seen. A golden crown adorned his brow, and in his hand he held a staff that flickered with bursts of cosmic light. "I have been waiting for you, Princess Sophie," he said, his voice as deep and resonant as the night itself. "I am Orion, guardian of the stars." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She had heard the name before, in ancient tales told to her as a child. Orion, the great hunter of the stars, the one who watched over the heavens and kept the balance between light and shadow. To see him standing before her, so grand and imposing, filled her with awe. "Guardian of the stars," Sophie replied, her voice respectful, though her heart trembled. "I have followed the celestial feather's light to this place. I seek to understand the path it shows me and the destiny it has chosen for me." Orion regarded her for a long moment, as if weighing her words carefully. His gaze travelled to the feather in her hand, and a faint smile touched his lips, though it did not reach his eyes. "The celestial feather is not just a guide, Princess. It is a key, one that unlocks the hidden realms of the stars. But it will also test you, for the path you walk is fraught with danger, and only those of true heart may pass through." Sophie swallowed hard. "What must I do?" Orion lifted his staff, and the stars around them began to shift, forming constellations that sparkled and danced in the sky. "There are fragments of starfire scattered throughout the celestial realms," he explained, his voice like the soft hum of distant planets. "These fragments hold the power of the stars themselves, and only by gathering them can you unlock the full potential of the feather." He gestured to a distant part of the sky where a nebula glowed faintly. "Your first trial lies in the forgotten nebula, a place where time is twisted and shadows of the past come to life. It is there that you will find the first fragment of starfire. But beware. Within the nebula dwells a spirit of chaos, one that feeds on fear and doubt. You must be strong of heart, for the trials ahead will test not just your courage, but your very soul." Sophie felt a shiver run down her spine. The thought of facing a spirit of chaos, of venturing into a nebula where time itself was distorted, filled her with apprehension. Yet, she knew there was no turning back. The stars had chosen her, and she had come too far to abandon the path now. "I will do what I must," she said. Her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her. Orion nodded, his expression grave but approving. "Remember, Princess, the stars are watching you. Trust in the light of the feather, for it will guide you through the darkness." With a wave of his staff, Orion stepped aside, and the path ahead shimmered once more, leading toward the distant glow of the forgotten nebula. Sophie took a deep breath, gathering her strength, and set her gaze forward. As she walked past the guardian of the stars, she felt the weight of her task settling on her shoulders. The celestial realms were vast, filled with wonders and dangers alike, and the path to gathering the fragments of starfire would not be easy. But with the celestial feather in hand, and the light of the stars above, Sophie knew she would not walk this journey alone. And so, with the sky glowing around her, Princess Sophie continued her journey into the heart of the stars, her courage and resolve shining brighter than ever before. The path led Sophie into the farthest reaches of the celestial realms, where the sky became darker and the stars more distant, as though they were watching her from behind a veil of shadow. Before her loomed the forgotten nebula, a vast swirling cloud of stardust that seemed to pulse with an eerie, otherworldly glow. It twisted in shades of deep violet and silver. A place where time had no meaning, and where the echoes of lost moments whispered through the stars. The air felt heavier as she approached, the weight of the nebula pressing down on her chest. The celestial feather glowed dimly in her hand, its light flickering uncertainly, as though it too could sense the danger that lay ahead. Sophie hesitated at the edge of the swirling mists, her heart pounding. She remembered Orion's warning. Within the nebula dwelled a spirit of chaos, one that thrived on fear and doubt. And yet, she had no choice. The first fragment of starfire lay within, waiting for her to claim it. Taking a deep breath, Sophie stepped forward into the nebula. At once, the world around her shifted. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to vanish, replaced by a sensation of weightlessness. She floated through the swirling mists, the stars above now faint and distant, barely visible through the thick fog. Shadows moved at the edge of her vision, and strange, dissonant whispers filled her ears. Voices that spoke in tongues she could not understand, yet filled her with unease. Sophie clutched the feather tighter, willing its light to grow brighter, but the nebula seemed to devour the light, dimming it to a faint glow. She pressed onward, her heart racing, her eyes scanning the mist for any sign of the starfire. But the further she ventured, the more the nebula seemed to close in around her, until it felt as though she were walking through a dream or a nightmare. Time lost all meaning. Moments stretched and twisted, past and present blurring together. Sophie could feel her memories slipping away from her, as if the nebula was trying to unravel her very sense of self. Faces from her past flickered in the mist. Her father, her mother, her people, all calling to her, but their voices were hollow, empty echoes. She knew they were not real, but their presence tugged at her heart, threatening to pull her into the fog of doubt. "Sophie," a voice whispered, soft and sinister. "Why do you walk this path alone? Turn back. You do not belong here." She shook her head, forcing herself to keep moving. The voice was not her own. It was the chaos of the nebula, trying to worm its way into her mind. "I will not turn back," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the howling winds of the nebula. "I have come for the starfire." But the voice persisted, growing louder, more insistent. "You are weak, princess. You are lost. What makes you think you can claim the power of the stars? You will fail, just as those before you have failed." Sophie's steps faltered for a moment, doubt creeping into her mind. The mist seemed to grow thicker, swirling around her like a cage, tightening its grip. For the first time since her journey began, she felt truly afraid. Then, faintly, the celestial feather pulsed in her hand, its light steadying, reminding her of the strength she carried. She took a deep breath, banishing the doubt from her mind. "I will not fail," she said, her voice firm. "The stars have chosen me, and I will not turn away." With renewed determination, she pressed on through the mist, ignoring the voices that whispered and jeered at her. And then, as if in response to her defiance, a faint light appeared ahead of her, flickering through the swirling fog. It was not the light of the feather, but something far older, far more powerful. Sophie quickened her pace, her heart racing with anticipation. As she drew closer, the light grew stronger, revealing a small pool of shimmering stardust nestled within the heart of the nebula. Floating above the pool was a fragment of pure starfire, glowing with a radiant silver light. It was small, no larger than a pearl, but its brilliance lit the entire space, pushing back the shadows. But before she could reach for it, the mist swirled violently, and a dark figure emerged from the fog. It was the spirit of chaos, its form ever shifting, a being made of shadow and starlight. Its eyes burned with malice as it loomed before her, blocking her path to the starfire. "You dare to claim what is not yours," the spirit hissed, its voice a low growl. "The starfire belongs to the cosmos, not to a mortal like you." Sophie stood her ground, her grip tightening on the celestial feather. "I am not here to steal it," she said, her voice steady. "I am here because the stars have chosen me to carry it." The spirit snarled, its form twisting and writhing in anger. "Prove it." In that moment, Sophie felt the feather pulse in her hand once more, its light flaring brighter than ever before. With a surge of courage, she stepped forward and raised the feather high. The light from the feather clashed with the darkness of the spirit, and for a moment, the nebula seemed to tremble. The spirit let out a roar, but as the light of the feather pierced through the mist, the shadows began to unravel. With one final cry, the spirit dissolved into nothingness, banished by the power of the stars. Sophie stood before the pool of stardust, her heart pounding. She reached out and gently took the fragment of starfire into her hand. Its warmth filled her with a sense of peace and purpose, and she knew then that this was only the beginning. The first trial had been passed, but many more awaited. With the first fragment of starfire glowing faintly in her satchel, Sophie pressed forward, leaving the swirling mists of the forgotten nebula behind. The celestial path stretched on, illuminated by the soft glow of distant stars, guiding her toward the next stage of her journey. Though she had passed her first trial, a sense of unease lingered. The spirit of chaos had been vanquished, but she knew the trials ahead would be even more challenging. As she walked, the night sky above began to change. Where once there had been a sea of stars, there now appeared 3 glowing moons, each one larger and brighter than the last. They hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the celestial path. The air around her seemed to hum with a strange energy, and Sophie could feel the pull of the moons, as though they were drawing her towards something beyond her understanding. The path led her to a great stone platform, suspended in the stars. At its center stood 3 towering stone pillars, each one inscribed with ancient symbols that shimmered in the moonlight. A sense of ancient power filled the air, and Sophie knew she had arrived at the next trial, the trial of the moons. As she stepped onto the platform, the celestial feather pulsed in her hand, its light flickering in response to the moons above. A deep, resonant voice echoed through the air, though no figure appeared. "Princess Sophie, chosen of the stars," the voice intoned. "You have entered the realm of the moons. Here, you will face the trial of wisdom, sacrifice, and truth. The moons reveal not only the light of the sky, but the shadows within yourself. To claim the next fragment of starfire, you must confront what lies within your heart." Sophie's pulse quickened as the voice faded into silence. She looked up at the 3 moons, their silvery light casting strange patterns across the platform. She felt a familiar sense of fear creeping in, but the feather's soft glow reminded her of the strength she carried. The largest of the moons, pale and full, began to glow brighter, its light washing over her. As it did, the air around her shimmered, and the platform seemed to shift. Before her appeared a figure, herself, yet not quite. It was Sophie as she had been as a child, wide-eyed and innocent, her hair flowing in the wind, her face untouched by the burdens of royalty or destiny. "Do you remember me?" the younger Sophie asked, her voice soft yet filled with a strange weight. "Before the stars called you, before the kingdom laid its burdens upon your shoulders, you were free, unbound by fate. Is this truly the path you wish to walk, or are you chasing a destiny that is not your own?" Sophie stared at her younger self, her heart heavy with the weight of the question. For a moment, doubt flickered in her chest. The child before her represented a time when her life had been simple, when her only concern had been wandering through the palace gardens and listening to the stories of the stars. But those days were long past, and the call of the celestial feather had awakened something deeper within her. "I do remember," Sophie said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I am no longer that child. The stars have called me to this path, and I choose to walk it, not out of obligation, but because it is my destiny." The child Sophie smiled sadly, then dissolved into the moonlight, leaving behind only silence. The first moon dimmed, and the second began to glow, its light colder and more distant. As its light fell upon her, the air shimmered once more, and another figure appeared. This time, her father, King Aldrich, his face lined with the wisdom of years, his eyes filled with concern. "My daughter," the king's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken worries. "You have always been my pride, but I fear for you. The path you walk is dangerous, and it may take you far from your home. Do you not long to return? To be safe, to rule your kingdom as a queen, as you were meant to?" Sophie's heart ached at the sight of her father. She had always admired his strength and wisdom, and his love for her had been a constant light in her life. But she knew that this was another test, one that would ask her to choose between the life she had known and the path that had been set before her. "I love you, Father," Sophie said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But the kingdom needs more than a queen who rules from the safety of her throne. The stars have called me, and I must answer. I cannot turn back now." King Aldrich's figure smiled faintly, then faded into the moonlight, just as the first had. The second moon dimmed, and the third began to glow, a crescent, sharp and bright. As its light touched the platform, the air grew colder, and the final figure appeared before her. It was Sophie as she was now, but older. Her face lined with experience, her eyes sharper, filled with both knowledge and pain. The future Sophie looked at her with a gaze that seemed to pierce her very soul. "Do you know what lies ahead?" the older Sophie asked. "You will face trials that will test everything you are. You will lose much, perhaps more than you are willing to sacrifice. Are you ready for the cost?" Sophie hesitated. The weight of the journey pressed on her, heavier than ever before. She did not know what the future held, or what she would have to sacrifice to fulfill her destiny. But as she looked at the future version of herself, she felt a quiet strength growing within her. She had faced the darkness in the nebula and emerged stronger, and she would face whatever lay ahead with the same resolve. "I may not know the cost," Sophie said softly, "but I will not turn back. Whatever the stars ask of me, I will face it." The older Sophie smiled, a small, knowing smile, and then faded into the light of the final moon. As the last figure vanished, the three moons glowed together in perfect harmony, their light converging in the center of the platform. There, floating in the air, was the second fragment of starfire, shining brighter than ever before. Sophie stepped forward and reached for it, her hand closing around the glowing fragment. The moment she touched it, the moons faded from the sky, and the platform returned to its original state. The trial of the moons was over. With 2 fragments of starfire in hand, Sophie knew she was one step closer to fulfilling her destiny. But the path ahead remained uncertain, and she could feel the weight of the future pressing down on her, even as the stars watched from above. The sky began to warm as Sophie pressed forward, the 2 fragments of starfire safely nestled in her satchel. The darkness of the trial of the moons faded behind her, and ahead, the celestial path brightened, bathed in golden light. As she walked, the air grew warmer, and the faint hum of distant music reached her ears, like the soft melody of a harp plucked by unseen hands. The celestial journey had shifted again, and Sophie sensed that something bright, perhaps even radiant, awaited her. Before long, the path brought her to the edge of a vast golden plain, shimmering as though the very air was alight with the rays of the sun. In the distance, Sophie could see 3 towering figures, their forms surrounded by halos of sunlight so bright they were difficult to look upon. Yet, she knew instinctively who they were: the daughters of the sun, ancient beings said to control the light of the heavens and guard the secrets of the sun itself. As she approached, the figures became clearer, their radiance tempered just enough for her to see their faces. They were tall and graceful, their skin glowing with an inner light that seemed to come directly from the sun. Their hair flowed like molten gold, and their eyes gleamed with the fire of distant stars. Each of them wore robes woven from light itself, shifting in hues of gold, amber, and scarlet. The eldest of the 3 stepped forward, her voice a melody of warmth and power. "Welcome, Princess Sophie," she said. "We are the daughters of the sun, guardians of the light, and keepers of the flame that sustains all life. We have watched your journey, and now you stand at the threshold of your next trial." Sophie bowed her head respectfully. "I am honored to stand before you," she said. "I seek the 3rd fragment of starfire to continue the path the stars have set before me." The second daughter, whose eyes gleamed with the fire of the setting sun, spoke next. The fragment you seek lies beyond the veil of light, in the heart of the sun's core. But to reach it, you must first prove yourself worthy, for the power of the sun is not easily given. The third daughter, her voice softer yet filled with the intensity of midday heat, added, "The light can give life, but it can also destroy. You must learn to balance its power, to control the flame without being consumed by it." Sophie listened, her heart steady but wary. She had faced darkness in the forgotten nebula and confronted the shadows within herself during the trial of the moons. But the daughters of the sun spoke of a different kind of trial, one that required not only strength but wisdom, the ability to wield power without letting it overtake her. "What must I do?" Sophie asked, her voice resolute. The eldest daughter extended her hand, and a sphere of pure sunlight materialized before Sophie, glowing with an intense golden heat. "This is the sun's heart," the daughter explained. "Within it burns the essence of the sun. Your trial is to carry it across the plane of flames, where the sun's light is most intense. If you can carry the sun's heart without letting its heat consume you, you will have proven yourself worthy of the next fragment." Sophie nodded, her hand reaching out to grasp the sphere. The moment her fingers touched its surface, she felt an overwhelming surge of warmth. Not painful, but powerful, like standing too close to the heart of a blazing fire. She could feel the energy within it, pulsing like a heartbeat, and she knew the challenge that lay ahead would test not just her strength, but her very will. The daughters of the sun stepped aside, revealing the vast plain of flames. The ground shimmered as if made of molten gold, and the air itself wavered with heat. Sophie took a deep breath, gripping the sun's heart tightly, and stepped onto the plain. At once, the heat intensified. The light from the sun's heart grew brighter, casting long shadows across the plain, and the warmth pressed down on her like the weight of 1,000 suns. With each step, the heat became harder to bear, and the air seemed to burn in her lungs. But Sophie kept walking, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. She knew that to falter now would mean failure, and the daughters of the sun would not offer her a second chance. The further she walked, the heavier the sun's heart seemed to grow. Its light burned brighter, casting waves of heat that seared her skin. Sweat beaded on her brow, and her limbs ached under the strain. But still, she pressed forward, drawing strength from the fragments of starfire in her satchel and the light of the celestial feather that pulsed faintly in her hand. At the center of the plain, the heat reached its peak. The sun's heart blazed with such intensity that it seemed to blur the very air around it. Sophie's vision swam, and her strength wavered. The urge to drop the sphere, to let go of the unbearable heat, surged within her. But she closed her eyes, drawing on the lessons she had learned. Control, balance, the understanding that power must be wielded, not surrendered to. With a final steadying breath, she raised the sun's heart high. The light flared once, and then, as if recognizing her resolve, it dimmed, its heat cooling to a bearable warmth. The plane of flame shimmered, and before her, floating in the air, appeared the third fragment of starfire, glowing with the pure golden light of the sun. Sophie reached for the fragment, her heart filled with the sense of triumph. She had passed the trial of the daughters of the sun, and the third fragment was now hers. As she took it into her hand, the plane faded, and the daughters of the sun appeared once more, their radiant faces filled with approval. "You have proven yourself worthy," the eldest daughter said, her voice warm with pride. "The light is yours to carry, but remember, Sophie, it is not only the stars you must protect. The light you now bear can guide or destroy. It is up to you to choose the path." With the third fragment of starfire in her hand, and the light of the sun now hers to command, Sophie bowed deeply to the daughters. The next part of her journey awaited, but for now, she had proven that she could walk in the light without being consumed by it. And with that, the path of the stars beckoned her onward once more. The warmth of the sun's heart lingered on Sophie's skin as she continued her journey. The third fragment of starfire safely cradled in her satchel. The celestial path before her was brighter now, illuminated by the fragments she had gathered, their soft glow lighting the way through the endless expanse of the heavens. The stars above seemed closer than ever, watching her every step, as though they knew the time for revelation was drawing near. The air around her began to change once more, growing heavier, charged with a sense of anticipation. Sophie could feel it in her bones, a truth waiting to be revealed, a prophecy that would soon unfold. The celestial feather pulsed faintly in her hand, guiding her toward a towering structure in the distance. Its form shimmered with the light of 1,000 stars, rising into the heavens like a monument to the cosmos itself. This was the Chamber of Stars, the place where the prophecy of her journey would finally be revealed. Sophie approached the chamber with a sense of awe. The structure was formed entirely from starlight, its walls glowing with constellations that shifted and danced across the surface like living stories. At the center of the chamber stood a great altar, and above it, the sky swirled with stars in patterns she had never seen before, as if the heavens themselves were waiting to speak. As she entered, a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant, like the very voice of the stars. "Princess Sophie, bearer of the celestial feather and the fragments of starfire, you have come far. You have faced the darkness of the nebula, the trials of the moons, and the light of the sun. Now, the time has come to learn the truth of your journey." The air around her shimmered, and the constellations above began to shift, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. Slowly, a single image emerged. A great blazing star surrounded by swirling darkness. Sophie stared at it, her heart racing. She could feel the power in the image, a force that tugged at the very core of her being. The stars have long foretold a time when darkness would rise to swallow the heavens. The voice continued. A time when the light of the stars would dim and the balance between light and shadow would be broken. The celestial feather was gifted to you, Sophie, because you are the one chosen to restore that balance. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She had known, from the moment she first touched the feather, that her journey was destined for something great. But the weight of the prophecy, the knowledge that the fate of the very stars rested upon her shoulders, filled her with both awe and fear. The fragments of starfire you have gathered are not mere pieces of light, the voice explained. They are the remnants of an ancient power, the light of the first stars forged at the beginning of time. With these fragments, you hold the power to rekindle the stars, to restore the balance and protect the cosmos from the encroaching darkness. The constellations above shifted again, and Sophie saw a vision of a great shadow sweeping across the sky, swallowing entire galaxies in its wake. She shuddered at the sight, her heart pounding in her chest. "But know this," the voice warned, growing softer yet more solemn. "The path ahead is fraught with danger. To wield the power of the stars is to take on a great burden, and the darkness that follows you will not be easily vanquished. The final trial awaits you at the final convergence, where the light and shadow will meet. It is there that the true test will come, and it is there that your destiny will be fulfilled." Sophie's mind spun as the weight of the prophecy settled upon her. She had always known that her journey was more than just a quest for fragments of starfire. But now, the full scope of what lay ahead was clear. The darkness she had sensed at the edges of her journey was not just a threat to her kingdom. It was a threat to the entire cosmos, a force that could undo the very fabric of the universe. For a moment, doubt crept into her heart. Could she truly face such a challenge? Could she, a single princess, stand against the rising shadow and restore the light of the stars? The trials she had faced had tested her in ways she could never have imagined. But this final trial, the one that lay at the convergence, would demand more than just her strength. It would demand everything she had. But as the voice of the stars faded into silence, the celestial feather pulsed softly in her hand, its glow steady and reassuring. Sophie took a deep breath, drawing strength from the light that had guided her this far. She had faced doubt before, and each time she had found the courage to press on. This would be no different. With the prophecy revealed, Sophie knew that the time for hesitation was over. The final trial awaited her, and the fate of the stars rested in her hands. She would face the convergence, and whatever darkness lay there with the light of the starfire and the celestial feather as her guide. And so, with her heart set and her path clear, Sophie left the chamber of stars, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. The final leg of her journey awaited, and the stars, brighter than ever, watched over her as she stepped into the light of destiny. Sophie stepped from the chamber of stars, the prophecy echoing in her mind. The celestial path stretched ahead, but now it was different, darker, more urgent, as if the very stars were holding their breath. The light of the celestial feather flickered, sensing the nearness of the final trial. The weight of her task hung heavy in the air, and though her heart was steady, a deep stillness had settled over her, like the calm before a storm. The sky above was no longer the familiar expanse of twinkling stars. The darkness had crept closer, swallowing constellations one by one, leaving behind only an empty void. Sophie could feel its pull, a cold presence at the edge of her vision. This was the shadow the stars had warned her of, the force that sought to consume the light of the cosmos. The final convergence, the place where light and shadow would meet, lay ahead. As she neared the end of the path, a strange energy filled the air, like the static before a great storm. The stars around her flickered weakly, their light struggling against the encroaching darkness. In the distance, a vast rift opened in the sky, a swirling vortex of shadow and light where the forces of the universe collided. This was the convergence, the heart of the final battle. Sophie's pulse quickened as she stepped closer to the rift. At its center, a figure stood, tall and imposing, cloaked in darkness that rippled and writhed like living smoke. Its eyes burned with an unnatural fire, glowing like two black suns in the endless void. This was the shadow she had sensed all along, the being who sought to claim the light of the stars and plunge the universe into eternal night. "You have come at last," the figure said, its voice a deep, hollow echo that seemed to shake the very fabric of the sky. "I have watched you from the beginning, Princess Sophie. You, who would defy the darkness and bring light to the stars. But you are too late. The light you carry cannot withstand the shadow." Sophie stood her ground, the celestial feather pulsing faintly in her hand. "The stars have chosen me to restore the balance," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her heart. "I carry the fragments of starfire, and with them, I will defeat you." The shadow figure laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that sent a shiver down Sophie's spine. "Do you truly believe that? The light you hold is but a flicker, and I am the void that will consume it. But I will give you one chance, Princess. Surrender the starfire to me, and I will spare you. Join the darkness, and you will be free from the burdens of destiny." Sophie's grip tightened around the feather. The temptation, for just a moment, flickered in her mind. The burden of destiny, of holding the fate of the stars in her hands, had weighed on her since the beginning. But she had come too far, faced too much to turn back now. The light of the stars, the hope of all creation, was worth the cost. "I will never join you," Sophie declared, her voice rising above the darkness. "The light of the stars is eternal, and I will fight for it, no matter the cost." The shadow figure's eyes narrowed, and the darkness around it seemed to thicken, swirling like a storm. "Then you will fall." With a sudden burst of energy, the shadow lashed out, tendrils of darkness surging towards Sophie like waves crashing upon a shore. Sophie raised the celestial feather, and its light flared brightly, pushing back against the shadow. The two forces clashed, light and dark, their powers colliding in a violent storm of energy that shook the very stars. Sophie gritted her teeth, the force of the shadow pressing down on her. The celestial feather glowed fiercely, but the darkness was vast, relentless. She could feel the strain, the weight of the universe pressing against her. The shadow's power was immense, and for a moment, doubt crept into her heart. But then, from the depths of her satchel, the fragments of starfire began to glow. One by one, they flickered to life, their light joining the celestial feather's glow. The warmth of the sun, the wisdom of the moons, the ancient power of the stars, all combined, their light growing stronger, brighter, until it was no longer just a flicker, but a blazing inferno of celestial power. The shadow recoiled, its darkness faltering against the radiant light. Sophie stepped forward, her strength renewed, her heart filled with the power of the stars themselves. She raised the celestial feather high, and the fragments of starfire ignited, their combined light shining like a beacon across the sky. "This is the light of the stars!" Sophie cried, her voice ringing out through the heavens. "It will never fade, and neither will I." With a final surge of energy, the light of the starfire exploded outward, flooding the convergence with brilliant, blinding light. The darkness screamed in agony, twisting and writhing as it was consumed by the starfire's radiance. The shadow figure faltered, its form dissolving into smoke, until at last it was no more. The rift in the sky began to close, the light pushing back the darkness, restoring the balance to the heavens. The stars above flickered back to life, their light shining brighter than ever before, as if celebrating the victory of their chosen one. Sophie stood at the center of the convergence, her heart pounding, the celestial feather still glowing faintly in her hand. The darkness had been vanquished, and the stars were safe once more. But more than that, she had fulfilled the prophecy, proven herself worthy of the light she carried. As the last of the shadow faded, Sophie felt a sense of peace settle over her, the weight of destiny lifting from her shoulders. The stars above shimmered in gratitude, their light a reminder of the journey she had taken, and the strength she had found within herself. The convergence was over, and the balance had been restored. And as Sophie gazed up at the endless sky, she knew that the light of the stars would continue to guide her wherever her path might lead. The stars had chosen her, and she had proven herself worthy. Now the universe lay before her, vast and full of endless possibilities. The journey was complete, but her story had only just begun.